Today I've got a maple bowl blank mounted on my lathe. I want to turn a bowl from it and then use the fluting jig I made in my last video and see what I can come up with. So let's go over to the lathe and get to work on it. I'm turning at 1000 RPM. I see professionals all the time move their tool rest with the wood spinning. Well, I'm not a professional, and I am very safety conscious. Now I just want to flatten the bottom. That should be flat enough. Now I just want to put a tenon on the bottom so I can reverse chuck it. I want a 1 3/4 inch tenon. So I've set my dividers to half of that, 7/8 of an inch. I'm going to put the right leg right on center and scribe the line with the left leg. Just darken it a bit so it shows up better. Now I'm going to use my parting tool to define the edge of this tenon, and I'm going to eyeball along the blade to make sure it's lined up with the bedways so that it's a parallel cut. Now that should be deep enough and large enough for my jaws to fit in there. You do that nicely. Now I'm just going to clean up the bottom, shape this a little better, and I'm not going to sand it too well because of what's coming next. I should have maybe mentioned this is a 1/4 inch deep. Now I'm going to clean up the bottom, and I'm going to take a little more off of the tenon. I want it to sit a little higher toward the top of the bowl so that the bowl will sit on this ring. And there is a gap between the bottom and the tenon, so I will leave it at that and do a little shaping to the bowl. And I think I'm happy with that shape. I'm not sure about this, but I'm going to leave it there anyway. I've not done any sanding on this. There are some cracks. It's still fairly wet wood, so I'm not quite sure what's going to happen here. I usually work with dry wood, so I don't have to worry about that. But this is a test. My next step will be to get the fluting jig out. First I went and I did some 3/8 of an inch deep. Every second one that you see is 3/8 of an inch deep. Then I took a look and decided they were too far apart. So I made the ones in between 3/16 of an inch deep. Now I'm going to fill those with some walnut strips and glue those in and see how it turns out. If you don't know how this was done, you didn't see my last video where I showed how to build the fluting jig. And if you didn't see that, you may not have seen the truing jig. First I had built the truing jig, then I modified that to give me the fluting jig. So you may want to go back and take a look at those videos to see how that was done. I'm not going to show that on here, it just take a little too much time. I've got in the description box below the video links to those videos if you want to check those out. So now I'm going to fill these with walnut strips. I'm sure I'm not the only woodworker who keeps scraps of wood. And I had a few pieces of walnut about 3/4 of an inch by anywhere from 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. I've cut them into pieces that I'm going to fit in here. Now, this bowl was rough turned a little bit wet, and it is warped just ever so slightly, so some of these flutes don't appear to be perfectly straight. So I'm going to have to put clamps on here, try to hold them solidly. I'm going to clamp this way on this end, and then around here on this end. And I'm hoping that will drive it in there and that the Titebond glue will hold it well enough. I'm going to put glue into the flute, and then I'm going to use the old rub joint. Put the corner in and rub it well until glue is spread. Make sure it's everywhere, and then clamp it in. We'll just hold it there for a few seconds and then put the clamps on. I apologize if the lighting is not very good. This is not a photographer's studio I'm in here. I'll give that a few minutes to dry and then do some more of these. When they're all finished, I'll be back. The 12 pieces of walnut are glued in now, and I let the glue set overnight to make sure it's set as well as it can be. A couple of things. When I turn these, I don't dare turn in from the end because it could cause the things to split. And the last thing I want is, if the grain is not perfectly straight, for it to split down below the surface of the bowl. Another thing, the grain direction. Obviously, the walnut's running this way, the bowl is running across in this direction. So I have a cross grain problem, and in the future this could separate because of that. Now this is just a test piece, so I'm not real concerned about it, but if I was doing a good bowl, I would want to probably do an end grain bowl and then not have that problem, as all the grain would be going in the same direction. One more thing, I have sharpened my bowl gouge. I want it to be as sharp as it can be. I don't want to have any problem with one of these being punched out of there. You could think of skimming this with a real sharp chisel or hitting it with a hammer. The hammer might just knock it out of there or break it, so I want a sharp gouge. Now I'm going to be turning this at 1000 RPM, and I'll be turning from the center of these strips toward the two ends to not end up with that splitting problem. I'm going to increase the speed to 2000 RPM. See if I get cleaner cuts. I've got some chipping going on in a few places. take off these sharp edges and reflatten this bottom a bit. That's better. And the tenon's still slightly higher than the bottom. I'm going to try a little bit of shear scraping on this. That does help. Right on the end grain there's a little bit of tear out that will sand out nicely. I'm just going to finish shear scraping this and then I will sand it. Fairly happy with the way these fit. I was afraid I might have some gaps, but it's looking pretty good. I don't know how well this will show up, but there are some jagged edges over the top of the walnut, and it's also far from true. So I'm just going to chew this up a little bit so I don't chew up the sandpaper on the edges here or my fingers. Much better. Now I can sand that. This maple does have some cracks in it. They're not terrible. And it is wood after all, so I'm going to leave those. I've sanded it down to 400, and I'm going to put on sanding sealer now. I'm going to do 2 coats. My sanding sealer is a 50-50 mixture of Zinsser seal coat and methyl hydrate. After each coat, I'm going to sand at 600 just to knock it back, and then take care of the finish. So my step now is going to be putting on this sanding sealer. And I'll be back after I get the 2 coats put on and it's sanded back. Now I've cut it back with 600 grit sandpaper. Nice smooth finish. I forgot to put a rubber glove on with that first coat, but I put it on for the second. It's not a real good feeling to put on your fingers, and it's probably not very healthy. Now I'm going to put on a couple 3 coats of friction finish, which is 3 equal coats of shellac, boiled linseed oil, and lacquer thinner. And as the name friction finish would tell you, it should be heated up after it sits on there for a while to let it really bring a glow to it, work it into the wood. I'm going to put on generous coats, and then I'll be back after it's on there to show you the friction. This is the first coat. It's not completely dry. Now I'm going to see what the friction will do to it. I've got the speed at 2,000 RPM. When something is spinning at 3,000 RPM, I think it's wise to stand out of range a little bit, so I stand off to the side. That's looking pretty good, but I think it can be improved. I'm going to put another 2 coats on, and then I'll be back to show you the results. That's 3 coats of that friction finish now, and it's looking pretty nice, but I just never want to quit, leave things well enough alone. So I'm going to try 1 coat of this Mother's Brazilian Carnauba Cleaner Wax. I quite like what it does on some things. So I'm just going to put a little bit on there at 3,000 RPM and see what that looks like. Looks very nice, and I must say this wax, when it heats up, has a very pleasant smell. A little bit not quite melted on there, so I'm going to just do a little bit more buffing. Well, I think I'm satisfied with that now. And it looks to me like the tenon is still running true, so I'm just going to reverse this now and start working on the inside. Unlike some turners out there, I actually have had things come out of the chuck. So I like, when possible, to start my first cuts with the tail stock moved up and the live center just off of the wood. It's not quite touching, but if this should come loose, it'll probably keep it from jumping out of there entirely. I'm going to be turning it slowly, just at 500 RPM, just to do this test. I'll increase that to 1,000 RPM and see what it's like. That seems to be holding it pretty well, so I'm going to move the tail stock out of the way and continue turning this. After checking with calipers, from this point it's getting just a very, very little bit thicker. So I want to take a little bit off of that before I get too deep, and this will tend to vibrate out here with no support. And I think I'm deep enough now, or very close to it. So I'm just going to continue bringing it down to that level, turning the walls in. I just took my gouge to the grinder and ground off the sharp edge of the shoulder. It was causing some bruising and scarring around in here, so I'm going to try cleaning that up very gently. Long way from perfect, but it has cleaned it up. Unfortunately, it's thin enough now that I'm getting some vibration here. So I'm afraid the rest I might just have to sand out. I'm going to give this one more try in there. Oh yeah, that's much better in here. Now I'll continue on the bottom. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to sand this now, and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like. It's sanded to 400, and I'm quite pleased. It's not the prettiest piece of wood by any stretch of the imagination. And a couple of these cracks go right through. If I take compressed air and blow on them, I can feel it on the outside. But that's all right. It's not going to be holding liquid. So now I'm going to finish this the same as I did the outside, and then I'll be back. I will reverse it and turn away that tenon, clean up the bottom. The inside is finished now. I'm happy with it. I'm going to reverse this now into my coal jaws and work on the bottom. I have the speed set to 750 RPM, which is just about the maximum I want to run coal jaws at. Now I want to remove this tenon and clean up inside. Cutting from the center to the outside, a pull cut this way is not my favorite cut. What I'm going to do is put this in reverse and cut from the center that way. I want to clean up a little further toward the outside of this ring. I'm going to switch to my 1/4 inch gouge, see if I can get a little closer. Now I'm going to try my spindle gouge that I think might get in there better. Yep, that's the trick. Just a little more shaving with the spindle gouge should do this. And I think that's got it. The rest is just going to be sanded. Well, there you are. One bowl with, what shall I call them? Filled flutes. I should do another one with just flutes on it, the open type, the round flutes, and see what that looks like. Maybe one day coming up. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. I've got it signed and dated on the bottom. Personally, I don't think it looks too bad. If you want to try one of these, what did I use? I used my swiveled base to mount this on so I could glue these strips in. I used the fluting jig, of course, which I modified from the truing jig. So I'm going to put links to the truing jig, the fluting jig, and that swivel base in the description box down below the video in case you want to look up how any of those are made. But let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Tell me if you like this. Click the like button so I know I'm not wasting your time. Thank you for joining me. Have a great day in your shop. Be safe. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for stopping in. Bye now.